Mirror me. I've always been a girl to like my reflection. I'm not too narcissistic, but I like to check up on how I look several times a day. Just a little peek, make sure my hair doesn't look too wild. Also, I'll admit, I do like my eyes. Kind of a sterling blue color. Very nice if you ask me. They're one of my favorite features anyway. I like looking at them, I guess, when I have free time. It's just something I've grown used to over the years. I keep mirrors, plenty of them in my room, but not too many. It's just not enough to appear narcissistic, but enough so that it's not a very long walk to see myself in one. I have one on top of my dresser and one on the door to my walk-in closet. I also keep a small handheld one by my computer, just so I could peek at myself, half for the purpose of seeing how glorious I look in the early hours of the morning. Anyway, I remember the day I started to hate mirrors. They had always scared me a bit in the past. I can't exactly say why, they just freaked me out. I liked looking at myself and stuff, it's just something about the movement I would always catch at my eye when I moved near one, especially in the early hours of the morning or when my room was dark. It always freaked me out for a while, but it didn't really help that some horror stories are based off of looking up and seeing distorted reflections in the glass, but that never really bothered me, I guess. I just liked my reflection too much. Anyway, one morning, I could remember well, I was getting ready for school, and I had gotten ready for school. Completely dressed, all ready to go. I was just waiting on my computer till my brother called me down to tell me I was ready to go. I noticed that I had forgotten to put on my makeup. I'd never put on that much, really. Lots of facial stuff. It bothered me, made my face feel heavy and fake. Even blush didn't really work for me. I normally just put on some mascara and eyeshadow, and that was it. I was out the door. Anyway, I realized I didn't have my mascara on, and I went over to put some on. I grabbed it and I walked to the full-body mirror hanging on my closet door. I looked up, and that's when I noticed it. It took me a while to catch at first, since I was still pretty tired from just waking up, but something wasn't right. Then I realized it was my facial expression. I didn't look confused like I should have, trying to figure out a puzzle. Instead, I looked mad. It wasn't me. My movements matched up to the reflection. I even tried feeling my face to make sure my eyebrows weren't furrowed in fury like that, but when I checked, they weren't. I looked very angry at myself from the mirror. Shocked and confused, I took a few steps back, then turned away altogether. I didn't put on my makeup that day. Instead, I just hurried out the door. Running, I didn't tell my mom why I looked shaken up. She didn't even seem to notice that much. I tried to catch my composure before I was down the stairs. That day at school, I tried to avoid the bathrooms as much as possible. I didn't look in them to see the mirrors whenever I walked by. I actually tried to avoid mirrors as much as I could that day. Finally, when I had got home, I was pretty exhausted. I don't know why, I just felt like sleeping, and I wasn't really thinking the terrifying scene from this morning long forgotten in my mind, until I walked past that closet mirror. Then my head started hurting, like I had received a giant headache. I glanced over to see what a ragged mess I was in the mirror, but I realized I wasn't holding on to my temple in my reflection like I was in real life. Actually, I didn't look anything in the reflection like I probably did in real life. I wasn't slightly slumped over. I didn't look tired. Instead, I looked fresh and angry, standing tall, glaring. It scared me out of my wits. I fell to the ground and screamed. I stared at those eyes. They weren't the ones I normally looked in the mirror, just focused on trying to get the details of them. Instead, they just looked ablaze with cold hatred, like it wanted to hurt me. I didn't realize. Finally, the reflection copied me. It fell to the ground like me and clutched her head in her hands, like me. I didn't realize what was going on until the throbbing in my head went away and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I realized Mom had heard me scream. I didn't want to explain to her what was wrong. She wouldn't believe me. Who would? Instead, I just stood up to the best of my ability, and when she asked the golden question, what was wrong, I simply sighed and said, I thought I heard something. We were known to have mice in our house. We weren't very proud of it, but I figured there was just a mouse scurrying around in the attic. Mom didn't seem completely convinced. After all, I must have looked pretty distraught at this point, but she nodded and left me alone in my room. I looked back at the mirror, and for the slightest moment I thought I saw her smirk at me, and I even thought I heard a little giggle, but then, as quickly as it came, it went back to normal, just the terrified me staring back from the mirror. Next, I quickly got changed into my pajamas and went into bed. The next morning, I didn't want to walk past that mirror. I didn't want to go anywhere near the mirrors. I didn't want to see her again, so I didn't. I just kept looking away from them. I did notice once or twice my stomach start to turn uncomfortably, or my head started to ache a little when I walked past them, but I refused to look. Finally, I was ready. I had an idea to check the bathroom mirror. After all, the closet mirror was the only one anything had happened in yet. I thought maybe it was the only one. That was my mistake. I went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and there she was. But it was different than before. She wasn't angry. And those eyes I love, the sterling blue, they weren't blue. They were black. Pure night black. My brown, short hair was messy, like I hadn't brushed in a while. And I realized when I raised my hands in terror from the insane grin on that face, I realized the blood covering them in the reflection, and the knife they were holding, drenched. She giggled, set the knife down, and wrote something in the mirror. It took me a while to read it, but soon I saw, "You're next." I didn't know what she meant by that, and it scared me. I held back a scream. I didn't want anyone coming into the bathroom. Somehow I wrapped my mind around the fact that I might actually be covered in blood. I couldn't let anyone find me like that. Instead, I ran back to my room and shut the door, and once again didn't look at any of the mirrors. I just slumped down by my door and started to sob. I couldn't get that image out of my head. And you're next. What did that mean? Who did she kill? Can reflections kill? How could she get me through the glass? Then I heard it. It was laughter. My head shot up, and I saw her staring at me from the mirror on my dresser, laughing. The cold fear in my brains turned to boiling rage. I was sick of her. I picked up the stool that I kept near my door, and I threw it at the mirror. It shattered into a million pieces with a blood-curdling shriek from her. I almost felt like laughing. Instead, I held my composure, hearing Mom come upstairs, and muttered under my breath, "Good riddance." That was just one mirror, though. There are millions of mirrors in this world. I tried not to think about that. Mom found me there, with all the broken glass in my room, standing. It didn't take long to realize I had thrown the stool at the mirror. Concerned, she informed me I wouldn't be going to school today. I could care less, even though I wouldn't have minded seeing my friends. Not seeing her again. Something to get her out of my mind. But that image couldn't leave my head. Me, innocence, covered in blood. Whose blood was it? Was it theirs? I couldn't stand that thought, even though it kept slipping in and out of my head along with many other horrible things. Finally, I went back to bed and just tried to sleep. I fell asleep finally, and it didn't help at all. Instead, I got one of the more brutal nightmares I've had for a long time. I've had nightmares before. I even was prone to night terrors when I was a little girl, but I assure you there are nothing like this. She wasn't in the mirror anymore. She was in my room, standing there with her knife, except for it was clean this time. But there, tied up in a half circle all around my room, were my friends and family, unconscious. I was standing in front of her, but I couldn't move. And then slowly, one by one, she walked to every loved one and slit their throats. They weren't awake. They didn't cry. They didn't scream. They didn't plead. That doesn't mean I wasn't. I was yelling, begging, sobbing. She just went along with her business as if nothing was wrong, as if what she was doing wasn't out of the ordinary. Some blood began to pool at their feet and run to where my bare feet were on the hard floor. I felt like being sick. My feet wouldn't move. I could scream, but the girl didn't stop. And then at the end, she walked right over to me, and with one swift movement and with no hesitation, plunged the knife into my gut. It felt like all the strength had been sucked from my legs. I stood there, wide-eyed for a moment, until I heard her, no, me, whisper, just like I said, "You'll be next." Her laughter echoed around me. My eyes shot open and I stared at my room, half praying I wouldn't see the bodies of my loved ones there. Half of me knew it was a dream, but it seemed very timid to say so. Finally, I had calmed down, but not before I glanced in my good mirror again. Except for she wasn't in the mirror. She was behind me. I stood frozen for a sec, and before I could react, I felt cold hands push on my shoulders. I fell towards the mirror, bracing myself for an impact that never came. Instead, like falling into water, I slipped through the glass. I landed on my floor with a thud and looked up. Saw her once again looking through the mirror at me, smiling. Her eyes weren't black anymore. Her hair wasn't a mess. She looked just like me. I got up and tried to go through the mirror again. Stuck. I pounded and started screaming. She just smirked and then giggled. The giggle fit turned into hysterical laughter, and then she just stopped, grinned at me, and cocked her head. Don't worry, I'll take very good care of everyone for you.